turn on and I'll get started and I'll try to work through the presentation as fast as I can, basically. It is on. Oh, okay. I don't see the light, but I believe you. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. This talk is sort of a research update, like a high-level research update, some of the research I've been doing in the last like year or two or more, but especially sort of the research topics that I think are like particularly hot in my mind right now. It's sort of meant to be like a high-level overview where I kind of drop you some high-level bombs. Don't go into really the technical details, but just give you an idea of like sort of the way things are looking from like a high-level research perspective to me right now. And it should be interesting. I mean, I promise it'll be interesting. So here we go. This looks like it's offensive, but it's just misleading, because here's like really the slide. Oh, how's this gonna work? You know, I've been for a very long time talking about how bad Nick Szabo is, and you know, I'm not exactly backing down, but I have like more to say on the topic about, you know, sort of like how do we move on. And then there's a conversation about smart transactions, which is, what's that? We have smart contracts. What are smart transactions? Aren't transactions dumb? And securities, which is everyone's favorite topic. And then, but actually the talk goes in the other order, so you have to wait for the end for the Nick Szabo stuff. So let's go through the security stuff, the boring stuff first, but I swear it's actually really exciting. So this is just so I'm going to give you the whole outline of the talk. But actually I'm going to skip the outline just because we don't have much time. So basically, what's happened in security, in the world of securities, is that like the SEC has been unintentionally really regulating the English language internationally for the purposes of the word securities, because everyone's really afraid to call something a security unless they be SEC regulated. And you know, and their own posture is like, oh, all securities are SEC regulated. And therefore, if something's not SEC regulated, for them, it's like it's a security that is regulated, but it's exempted, and that's how it's regulated, as exempt. And so they live in this world where all securities are in their purview, and therefore everyone else is sort of forced to live in this world where if you say security, that means something that's regulated by the SEC. And this like changes and restricts the way that people use the language. It's like screwing with the way we use English around this particular word, and it really has, as I like hope this will show you, really, really negative effects on like the way people understand or are able to reason about and navigate this space. So basically, people are afraid to use it in a way that the SEC doesn't like, or isn't exactly the way the SEC uses it. The SEC uses it, you know, within the purview of their regulatory thing for the purposes of their regulation. And so for them, all securities are SEC regulated. And so this kind of leads to this weird world of the SEC regulating the English language internationally. But you know, we're gonna kind of break the mold a little bit and go outside of just this world of financial securities, of debts and bonds and equities and options and futures and all these different financial instruments, which to one party, the seller, is a liability, and to the buyer, it's an asset. So these are like the traditional sort of asset security in like a SEC sort of world. It's all about money. It's all about sort of securities and financial contracts. And the financial contract is like a type of legal contract. So the natural way to generalize this is, okay, what if we have securities in any legal contract? In any contract where you can have a position that you can sort of create a little token for, where the person of that token has that position. You know, we could, like for example, you use that kind of mechanism among many, many other mechanisms to create securities in contract law. Also, if you think about like a signed piece of paper with contract terms, that's also kind of a security in contract law. Because basically it secures your position in contract law. And so, you know, like people used to securities securing financial positions and financial contracts, but why not in contract law in general? And what about corporate law? Well, we have in Ethereum and sort of very famously DAOs. And DAOs are literally securities in corporate law. Like you like post this smart contract onto this like medium, and now like you have a corporate person born and like, you know, sort of like recognized in the purpose, for the purposes of like commercial disputes and, you know, more and more disputes also. A corporate, like an incorporation document also can form as this kind of security. So, but all these are sort of securities in the law. And you know, and that's sort of like the natural place today where we talk about securities, because basically, because of this history of securities being like a legal sort of instrument. But actually, if you think about sort of the basic organizational principles of security, they work in many, many, many different contexts. And I want to give you some examples of computational distributed system securities that are very, very useful, and which like you just don't think of or you wouldn't think of because like sort of securities are not for this world of like computer science and distributed systems. So, normally you ask, okay, like, will this program halt? Not, is there someone on the market willing to sell me security that this program will halt? And when you're willing to ask that question, it's like, it sort of flips a little bit, it changes a bit the nature of the question. It's not so much, can a program tell me whether this program will do this? It's whether can any market participant tell me that this program will do this? Not every program, but like this program in particular. And so like, this sort of speculative, prospective promise, maybe perfectly hedged or not. You may know that the program is going to halt, you may not. But you could still sell this kind of instrument, you could still transfer it, and it could help an operating system figure out how to schedule tasks. It could help systems organize because of the predictions and promises that are entailed in securities. So today we can't imagine economics without securities. Soon we won't be able to imagine any kind of crypto or computer science without them. People say code is law. I mean, as far as I can tell, code is securities because it like secures a relationship between you and like a service provider almost always, or you and some provider of some kind. And so, code is much more securities than law already. We have all sorts of securities sitting on our systems and computers. We just don't talk about them like that. We don't recognize them as such. But they're sort of everywhere. In every speculative execution, you have sort of like a promise that is sort of like, it's almost, it could basically be, and it often is, like you create like a token for it based on like some programs, like expectation about what will happen somewhere. And so basically like the organizational indispensability of securities in economics actually like will have an analogy and has an analogy directly like in computer science and distributed systems, where basically like computers need to organize to figure out how to execute tasks. They can't just imagine themselves in a computational world where they're thinking one computational step ahead, like what probability is it to the next step. They have to prospectively think far ahead and understand the way that, sort of like we understand economics today, like the critical role of speculation. That's like sort of going to be the case also in computer science and distributed systems because it's just that much more efficient. We can't imagine economics without them because it sucks without them. And because of this reason, basically, securities are proliferating. They're proliferating all over the place, and they're not recognized legally, but they're becoming more and more of an important part of economic life. And just because they're not recognized doesn't mean they're not recognized. I just mean that, like some formal regulatory authority won't formally recognize them. I mean, people still have disputes. People still are in commerce. And as these things proliferate and become more and more ordinary part of doing commerce, basically every neoliberal subject's right to transact is on a collision course with SEC regulation. And this is like a very, very serious sort of legal problem. Great. Next section, smart transactions. But yeah, let me just like summarize again. Okay, securities are actually not just securities in financial contracts that are regulated by the SEC, but there's a whole world of different kinds of securities out there, some of which are regulated by the SEC and not. And by letting the SEC monopolize the use of this word, we're losing out on tremendous organizational capacity, efficiency gains, et cetera, et cetera. And basically the issue with this is basically that because people sort of do it anyways, just in a way that's not recognized by, like, they don't know they're creating securities, but they are, and they don't know they're having securities disputes, but they are, and they don't know they're doing it in like everyday commerce. But as this becomes sort of more and more normal, as like everything becomes like digitalized and smart, people basically like almost won't have a right to transact without touching securities because it's almost like you can't compete, like you can't participate really in the economy. Like what is your right to gainful employment if you can't use securities in like the 21st, 22nd, 23rd century? I mean, it doesn't seem legit almost at all. And basically just because of the indispensable nature of securities and organization. Very broadly speaking, like way outside of financial products. All right, so next topic, smart transactions. Smart transactions are sort of, smart transactions is sort of like you can think of it as like a marketing name for this general idea that I'm about to describe. It's basically it's what it sort of came out of is this actually as a response to the MEV sort of challenge to the constitution of the blockchain. You know, everyone is surprised about what transactions can do and contracts can do sort of all the time. But like with MEV, sort of this has pushed us and surprised us even more. We don't really know as much sort of like what a transaction is supposed to do as before. We like the semantics of a transaction, and therefore, you know, what it means to transact with the blockchain sort of is challenged by the introduction of this searcher intermediary role that facilitates the execution of transactions. And so basically, you know, you have like in the classic MEV world, you have like the transactions that are made first, and then the searcher that searches second, and then the searcher sort of just orders the transactions, and the transactions like don't interact with the searcher in any way, or the searcher in any way, or with each other really, except for like in the way that they do in the EVM, in like the according to like the EVM traces. And that's sort of like the birthplace of MEV. But because that sort of challenges transactions, transactions basically have to respond. And they basically become smart. They basically become search aware. The way that people like write Solidity, that Solidity that, you know, programs their programmable transactions, changes because of the search. The way that Ethereum transactions execute like has to adapt and is adapting as transactions secure themselves against the search, and eventually use it and master it in the sense of becoming sort of not victims of it and exploited by the search, but are more like being provided services by the search and are tapping into it as like a wealth of sort of computational and informational power that searchers have as an economy. So basically, instead of transaction semantics being like Ethereum trace semantics, it's actually very, very much more complicated. A smart transaction interacts with like the search by paying for MEV deliberately, by conditioning when it pays deliberately in the context of not just itself in the search, but the other transactions of that bundle. And also there's like a, you know, the possibility of introducing minor transactions, or sorry, the searcher transactions into these bundles, right, which we've known for a while. But that basically amounts to doing I/O with transactions at search time, at MEV time. And so actually, like, not only is it about ordering them and interacting with them, but also, you know, in a way that they pay you for and that they want to have done to them, you know, instead of this sort of extractive, like involuntary extraction of value that we kind of see today. So basically, like, as transactions become smarter, you know, like transaction agents will refuse to participate in liquidations. You know, they'll just refuse to, you know, be part of certain kinds of activities that can be more and more recognized as transactions become smarter and smarter. And, you know, instead of a world where sort of everyone tries to create a bundle so they don't get background, maybe everyone will pay a little service fee for background protection. And like, maybe that is gonna be a little more expensive for everyone, but at least, you know, but the benefit is like, oh, you don't get involved in this liquidation sort of thing, which actually in the end is like much more expensive than like the protection actually, because the protection services are relatively simple. But let's not go into detail too much. The point is basically, transactions today don't interact with the MEV search. They don't really, and when they do, it's amazing. It's like, hail this innovative. But this is going to happen much more. We're going to see transactions become much more aware of the search, much more aware of who they're being searched with, and much more able to sort of conduct the search and say, look, I want the search, I want this kind of result. And then to be included in a bundle basically should mean that your transaction was like solved, optimized, executed correctly, like executed well, as if like, you know, as if the MEV search wants your transaction to go well. So like, you know, smart transactions, I think of it as like, they're programmable, yes, like all Ethereum transactions, but they're also sort of situationally aware. And in that context of MEV search, that means two things. One of them is being aware of the future, as like the search is going beyond the current state of where your transaction is executed. But it also means being aware of other transactions and service providers and the search in general, like in this sort of very broad and open-ended way, because basically we have like arbitrary I/O with arbitrary sort of flexibility within the search. Because basically, like, a transaction can introduce arbitrary data to the blockchain that like people can call, etc. So, you know, there's a tremendous so basically, there's a tremendous explosion of the semantics. Instead of it just being ordering of dumb transactions, it's like ordering and parameterization of smart transactions, where basically like they behave differently on these different search traces, maybe contingent even on which of on search data that isn't available in the EVM, and all sorts of things that in the future you can imagine they become aware of, which today they can't or have limited awareness of. And sort of the amazing thing about smart transactions, though, really is, or there's a lot of amazing things, but one of the amazing things is the way that sort of the world computer, as like the concept, sort of, isn't sort of just executing your transactions, but also optimizing them and potentially putting a lot of computational power, not towards something like proof of work, but towards actually like the faithful execution of your transactions. And so, the demand for these fees, the demand for the search, actually, I think will be sort of created by smart transactions, also more than just today by searchers who are trying to extract value, because basically they're gonna basically be paying for these better outcomes for their transactions. And this is going to create new market participants and unexpected market configurations as people figure out what best ways to serve different transactions. And basically, sort of this culminates into this sort of realization that yeah, proof of work is obsolete by proof of stake, but miners can still do MEV mining, and that actually can be very useful because imagine if the world computer sort of mining power wasn't just there to secure it in this relatively slow execution, but actually could be devoted to optimizing the execution of all the transactions, searching the space of all the possible ways they could be ordered to find ones that everyone likes, that it really just does a great job across the board. Sort of compositional search is amazing magic, and it takes a lot of either amazing lucky math or computational power. And we have this tremendous computational resource today, like the proof of work mining rigs in the ecosystem. And they can transition to MEV mining if the MEV search ecosystem is organized in such a way where searchers can use this commodified searcher as part of their ecosystem. And if it's done pre-merge, then the miners maybe won't have to sell as many graphics cards, which maybe means we have a more powerful world computer, which maybe means we get better transactions. And so actually, instead of this world where proof of work is politically undesirable, should be banned because it's bad for the environment, suddenly it's optimizing the economy and is good for GDP growth and needs to be mandated because of the recession. And sort of the politics changes around mining when it goes from proof of work mining to MEV mining, in particular in this sort of post-smart transactions world where MEV is actually good for the transactions that are being searched. Where basically all these resources going to optimize transactions would actually be sort of not wasted, but creating economic surplus for lots of different market participants. So basically, we didn't have a prospect for miners in the proof of stake transition because proof of stake obsoleted proof of work. But now that the MEV constitutional sort of situation is happening, actually we have this opportunity where basically we can give miners a path forward, basically to change nothing about their hardware setup, but to change sort of the nature of the mining from this proof of work mining to MEV mining. All right. So I'm going to the last part of this. The last part. I just want to know. Can someone tell me how many minutes I have?
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes.
Great. So what did Nick Szabo do? Well, he kind of invented blockchain immutability and smart contracts and associated them with the blockchain before anyone was even around, and sort of and he doesn't really deny it, and blockchain immutability comes also with the stuff like governance minimization and a lot of associated memes, including if it's not permissionless, it might as well be a database, and all sorts of memes. There's this memeplex that sort of is an outgrowth of Nick Szabo's work in blockchain governance, not blockchain, in crypto protocol governance that he did before crypto was crypto that we recognize today, back when it was nothing to do with crypto assets and all to do with sort of cryptography and distributed systems. And at that time they did have centralized e-mining and stuff like that, but that was a big problem, right? Because it would get shut down, and sort of Nick Szabo, in his amazing brilliance and limited wisdom, associated immutability with a blockchain, and did this amazing legal trick of setting up like technically a private international legal order that's very, very deviant, and which basically like refuses to change the software no matter what claims are brought by who, because it's not me, it's immutable. And so he really created a big part of our history in Ethereum, in like the cryptocurrency space in general. And he created like the conceptual frame in which we exist, in which we identified or still identify for so long. So he really like defines us in a sort of big way. And the reason why it's sort of like really critical is because we have blockchain governance issues and we can't solve them. We can't do anything about them because he's banned us from it. He said, no, you're not allowed to touch it. And it really does screw up blockchain governance in a big way, because it makes it so that like, earlier decisions become ingrained, they fossilize into the protocol, which then basically like, it doesn't matter like how criminal the will of the founder, it doesn't matter what disputes there are, it doesn't matter what the consequences. Sort of Nick Szabo says like, no, like I know better, like politics only goes one way, like just no to politics, no to morality, no to law, etc. And sort of like, he's wrong, and we can take it down very much in many, we break down a million orders. Oops, oh no, what happened here? Oh, I need to reload I need to refresh because I was, I don't know how to do this. It's just okay. Annuler. Pas maintenant. Oh. Almost there. Oh yeah, great. So yeah, but and basically like the sort of like despite like how severe what he's done is actually, because like fully autonomous software, like unstoppable code, like RoboCop, like combined with Chainlink and like 4chaners. I mean, it's not going to be a good story, and it's like already not. And I think there's sort of like a difficulty that we have in recognizing, okay, like, that he did this thing that we identify with, and that is horrible. And then, but even if you do, it's actually really challenging also to like forgive him for this thing, because like he's created this horrible thing that now is like a part of you. It's like, how do you forgive him for that? Especially when he's compromised our governance situation completely, where we basically don't have the political freedom, legal freedom to maneuver to protect ourselves, our users, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Especially when the consequences are so high, it may be hard to understand how we can and why we might need to forgive him. But we do need to move on, and we can't create a blockchain governance regime that's just a reactionary sort of, anti-Szabo thing. We need to have like a independent, foundational, constructive approach that just, sort of moves on beyond like his paradigm. Doesn't like sort of try to create this reactionary, like what is this called? The material dialectic, like incorporating Szabo's thing into some better future. No, like it was wrong. It's part of our history. We can admit it. We can forgive him, move on, and just do it in a better way that has nothing to do with and is not defined with respect to, his failed blockchain governance ideology, and matrix, et cetera, et cetera. And it can be really, really tough to forgive someone who's done something, in particular when it affects you personally. A lot of things helped me forgive Nick Szabo. Maybe the number one main thing, though, was to realize that, like, I could have done worse. I could have done worse. Like, I could have been in his place and have done worse, not just in that place, but in another place. Like, and I can imagine sort of how you can be in this legal world of thinking, like, logically that, like, the conclusion, because law is fucked, it's just to ban it. Like, use law to ban law. Like, let's make it right one law that says no law is allowed, and, like, that's it. And when you're coming from, like, this particular, like, legal tradition that, like, we have in the West, like, it's not unsympathetic, because, like, legal systems are, like, inherently disenfranchising, they're inherently dehumanizing, they're inherently, like, undermine people's ability to, like, have, like, justice and to be treated in a humane way. And so, like, imagining that the law is made of legal systems and that legal systems aren't subject to the rule of law and that, like, we just have, like, law as a system and that all systems are corruptible and going down this, like, sort of structuralist logic of, like, the fallibility of law, like, in the way that, like, I might do for, like, every single blockchain governance mechanism. You say, like, no, it just doesn't work, like Nick Szabo basically did and said, no, but as a result, it isn't like, oh, we just don't use the structural stuff. We, like, have, like, other means. The result is no, you make a structure that says no structure, like no rules allowed, basically. Like that's like the one rule. Another way to think about it is like, you have a structure and then you put some do not tamper stickers on it. And like that's sort of like that's what he's done because like it's better in his view than having like a system that changes the system. And as like, and it is kind of traumatic to realize that like, okay, he did this horrible thing that like also you would have done. Okay, but it does help with the forgiveness part to like understand that like actually it's a fallibility that comes potentially from the like legal matrix that he's in and the lack of possibilities that he has in his own sort of legal struggle. A lot of other things helped me forgive Nick Szabo also. But then another thing that really, really helped me is the lack of time for redemption. There was no time. There's no time to go back and to fix all this in a way that is properly, fully redemptive. And so since there's no time for redemption, you actually can't, you don't want to wait your whole life. You don't want to wait too long before you can forgive someone. Basically, when someone is going to take 10 years to redeem themselves, like it might not be okay for you to wait 10 years to forgive them. And so in these timeline mismatch scenarios, I think you can kind of have an exceptional sort of forgiveness because of the need for forgiveness on a faster timeline than the possibility of redemption. So basically, like the impossibility of quick redemption, plus like my immediate need to like detach of like a Nick Szabo reactionary posture and instead have like my own independence, like completely, like emotionally, completely. Basically, it sort of drove me to find these reasons, like why basically like. Why I can forgive him, and it's not sort of wrong for me to do that, despite everything that he's done, because of a number of reasons, including the fact that, like, sort of, he defines, like, me and my friends, because of the way we see the world, because like, I could have done worse, and because, like, the timeline that I need to forgive is, like, way shorter than the timeline that he has for redemption. But redemption is possible. For Nick, for crypto. And it's a hell of a good thing. I mean, it's going to protect us, and it's going to make everything much better. I think we should really try to recognize the bad, move on and do better in like a totally fresh start kind of way. Thanks, guys.
Just don't forget to take your stuff in the cloakroom because we're going to close everything, and you don't want your luggage or jackets to stay with us during the night. I'm sorry you don't have questions for Q&A, time for Q&A, but we're closing down the venue, so I think we should kind of exit. Thank you all. Thanks.
I thought you were saying 2 minutes.
No, I was saying cut. No, it's supposed to finish at 15, it's 27.
That was amazing.